Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about some skills you need as a filmmaker, as a videographer, that may not initially come to mind. They may not be the first thing you think of when you think of a skill set that you need when you're making videos. But I have found that there's a few kind of skill sets that you need in videography to kind of help you along the way. Some are more important than others, but I'll go ahead and break those down. So the first thing is you need some sort of skill set when it comes to music and audio recording. I definitely took this for granted when I got into film because previously to me actually wanting to go into video and film I thought for the longest time that I was going to go into audio engineering. I thought that I was going to be a producer in the studio recording audio with artists. And so I learned a lot about the recording process, how to mic things, how to mic voices, and instruments and all of that good stuff. And also the post kind of processing side of it, of learning how to, use EQs and compressors and limiters and, just a broad range of kind of plugins that you can use to enhance your audio and make it sound better. And so I kind of had a head start with that. And I didn't realize how much of an advantage that was until I started working with some people that didn't have that training. And then you realize really quickly that, hey, this is actually a really, really important part of film that some people don't actually know that well. And so I would say if you're wanting to get into film or videography, music is one of the places you have to start. Music, audio recording, audio production, that whole side of things, because when it comes to video, audio is actually 50% of the package. Right? If you think about it, obviously you're seeing things, you're visually intaking the art form or the video that you're watching, but the other piece is the audio, right? And sometimes we don't think about that as much, we take it for granted, but that's actually a huge part of movies. It's a huge part of documentaries and advertising, and all of that is what we hear as well. And so there's a couple different elements to this. Obviously there is the kind of dialogue, the narrative that we're hearing, typically like from a talking head or voices, some sort of interaction of characters, something along those lines, right? We're hearing a person talk. And so you need to know how to capture that, whether it's, utilizing lav mics like what I'm wearing right now, or shotgun mics, or there's different ways to capture it, but you need to kind of understand the best techniques that you can use in specific spaces and environments, as well as how to make that environment sound really, really good, whether it's, laying down carpets or using sound blankets, something like that to make the best of your space and make it sound as good as it can sound. And then going into post-processing, right? We need to learn about some of the plugins that we can use. The main ones, EQ and compression, those are the top two. And then you can go even further than that and you can learn about, reverb and delay. And there's also, when it comes to video, de-reverb and stuff like that. If you're, recording in kind of an echoey space, that can be a tool that you utilize. You can denoise your audio to take out some of the hum of like a refrigerator or something like that. And then beyond that, you can get into the world of mastering, and then you can apply effects and plugins to your overall project to make sure that all the sounds that you put in blend together really nicely, and it's just well prepared for your export. Within sound, there's even more layers, right? We don't just have dialogue, but we also have sound effects. We have diegetic sound, sound that makes sense with the environment or the scene that's happening, right? If you see a car go by, having the sound effect of a car go by. But then you also have more constructed sound effects or more kind of like artificial sounds, right? Where we have like whooshes or like, a boom or a poink or, whatever that sound effect is, that just adds a little bit more energy and a little bit more engagement to our videos, but they're not necessarily sounds that were there on the day of filming. You can also add atmospheric sounds, traffic, cityscapes, that sort of thing. And then the step further than that is obviously adding the music, right? Like music is a huge part of film, and it can make a huge drastic change to the tone of our video. And so understanding music, understanding how genres and BPM, meaning the tempo of the music, and the key that music is in, and all of that, and chord changes, understanding those pieces of music can go a really long way in laying the tone of your film and being very strategic with that. After all, film is an emotional medium, and music is one of the biggest things that we can do to our film to make it emotional, to make people feel the emotions that we want them to feel. Even just practically, you need to understand how music works in order to edit a project. I can't explain the amount of times that I am editing a project and, the duration of the project is, a minute, but the song that I need to use is 3 minutes. And I need to cut that song down to perfectly fit with the project. And I need to switch things around and match the energy in certain parts that I need it to be bigger or I need it to be quieter. And so I'm having to manually go in and switch this song around and kind of bend it to my will. But the only way that you can do that is if you understand how music works, to understand, where the downbeats are and understand what a downbeat even is, how music is broken up into bars of, 3 or 4 or 5, or, there's a lot of different time signatures that music can fall within. But understanding those basic principles will go a really long way in allowing you to edit a project however you want to, and it just opens up a lot of freedom in that. The second skill set I would say is animation. Now, you may not always be, fully animating a project, right? Like you may be delivering film, like video. That's the thing that you do. You're not necessarily an animator, and that's great. And I'm in the same boat as that. I don't really deliver animated projects, but I still know some raw principles and maybe even a little bit beyond that, just the principles of animation. And even if you think about it, you've probably animated before on a video or a photo or a graphic or whatever. If you go into Premiere and you add a keyframe for your scale and a keyframe at the end for your scale, and you have a little bit of a zoom in, right? Like you have that 10% or 5% kind of like zoom in to bring that like photo in a little bit and create some movement. That's animation in its barest form. Like that's what animation is. But we can go a step farther than that, and we can incorporate that into titles that we do and have lower thirds and all of that, right? Like we can create motion graphics and to our logos and our titles and all of that stuff. We can add, various levels of animation to it, whether it's just like even adding like a fade is technically kind of animating it, right? Like we can add a fade in and out. We could make the text, slide down and reveal. We can do a lot of different things with it, and understanding animation, or at least the basic elements of it, will really open up the world, or open up your world to be able to create what you want in your films. And that doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be doing like full character animation, that sort of thing, but just even learning how to animate text and the really, really raw, basic pieces of animation is gonna really help you to level your films up. And yes, you can buy preset kind of like animations and buy that from your favorite like YouTuber, or buy it on a stock website or something like that. And that's great, but there will come a time where you need to customize. And if you don't know how to animate, you're gonna have to sub that work out, or you're gonna be, pulling your teeth out trying to figure out, how do I do this? So it's good to learn that skill set before it comes along in your job, so that you, one, can start incorporating it into your current work, and two, when you finally do get asked to add elements like that into your work, which I guarantee will happen, you have the skill set already available to be able to execute that work. The third category is IT and tech. Now, a lot of people take this for granted. A lot of people have this skill set just because of the generation that they're in. If you're in, a younger generation like me, millennial or younger, you probably have a pretty good grasp on technology. You've probably used a computer before. If you're editing, you obviously have used a computer before. And a lot of these things we take for granted, but I think it's still important to acknowledge this as a skill set, right? Not everyone knows how to troubleshoot. Not everyone knows how to operate, software and all of that. And so understanding basic bare bones IT and tech can go really far. simply because of the fact that we're working with hardware, we're working with computers, and we're working with software, we will have to an extent, understand IT and tech. And that goes as far as knowing what computer to buy. You need to understand, the difference between RAM and GPU and, graphics cards and all those things. You need to understand those elements of what make a good machine to edit on. You also need to understand how to troubleshoot software problems, right? Premiere, if you use Premiere, you have dealt with some sort of bug at some point, I guarantee it. It happens and it comes up, and you need to understand the basic kind of like systems to troubleshoot when you're dealing with software, so that you can problem solve yourself out of that. You also need to understand read times and write times, and the difference between, spinning hard drives and SSDs. And there's actually a big skill set there, or a big kind of knowledge base that is sometimes overlooked when it comes to videography. It's not just knowing how to use your filmmaking gear, like a camera and lenses and those pieces, but it's also learning to use the computer side of it, right? Most of us are recording digital these days, and so we're using hard drives, and we we need to understand, write speeds and, what hard drives are going to be the fastest for us to use. That stuff's really, really important. And it can speed up your workflow quite a bit. And at the end of the day, time is money. And so that goes a really long way. The next skill set is important, especially if you're freelancing or running your own production company, but even all around, I think it is important as well. And that is, as filmmakers, we need to be good at time management and just general organization. And the reason behind this is there's a lot of moving parts, right? Simply, even if you just shoot and you don't run a business or freelance, there's a lot of moving parts, right? You have to take care of your gear, you have to charge gear, you have, a gazillion batteries that you have to look after and make sure that you're not missing any and they're all charged before going on a shoot. You have to make sure that you're on top of your frame rates and your camera settings and, all of those things, and making sure that you bring all your lighting gear. And there's so many moving pieces. And then on top of that, you have your narrative and your scripting and all that kind of stuff too. And so there's a lot of pieces that you have to stay on top of. And if you aren't good at time management and planning and organization, it's gonna be really, really hard to be successful, right? Because you're gonna miss something and then it's gonna look bad, and that's gonna be a reflection on you and what it's like to work with you. And it just looks bad if you don't have it together. And so you need to make sure that you have your ducks in a row, right? You need to make sure if you have a shoot the next day that you've allocated and planned time to charge your gear, to make sure that all of your gear is prepped and you have your inventory. And then after a shoot, making sure that you don't forget anything. And there's so many different pieces that you potentially could forget. And so just making sure that you are organized, that you have systems. And the really interesting thing is in the creative field, I think like a lot of people are wired as creatives, right? Like in a creative field, you're wired to be a creative. But usually creatives don't have the detail skill set, right? Like usually creatives are more ideas driven and less so detail driven. They care more about the big picture and the like overarching ideas and concepts and stuff like that. They're not necessarily the kind of people that are digging into details. And so, but you kind of have to be. You have to learn that skill set a little bit in this industry if you're going to be successful, right? Like you have to work in where some of your weaknesses are. And some people are gifted with both. Some people, for some miracle, are creative and detail oriented, and that's the perfect combination. That is great. But there's also a lot of people that aren't, that they only have the creative side and they're kind of missing the detail side. And so you have to create systems, you have to create routine, you have to create just something to help you to actually be strong with those details. And this is even more important if you're a freelancer or running your own production company, because not only do you have to think about the film production side, but you also have to think about the business side, right? You need to take care of invoicing and bookkeeping, unless you have someone that does that for you. You have to deal with marketing and sales and client work and scripting and all of your gear and hiring subcontractors and paying their invoices. And there's a lot of different things that you have to keep track of and stay on top of. And so it's so important to manage your time well, put it in your calendar. Everything has to be blocked out in your calendar. Otherwise it doesn't exist. And if you can get good at this, you can be successful, right? Like if you can time manage, then you'll be able to make sure that you have your ducks in a row, that you are on top of invoicing, that you have time to market and, you know, have sales calls and also have time to do your work. Like if you aren't intentional about budgeting those things out in your schedule, things will fall to the wayside, and you know, you have greater chances of not being successful because something will fall apart and it will look bad. It'll be a bad reflection upon you and your company, and you don't want that, right? And so time manage, put it in the calendar, stay on top of those things. The final piece is interior design. And the reason that I say this is the amount of times that you'll walk into a project, walk onto a job, and it's your job to make it look pretty, right? Not all of us are blessed with having an art department. Not all of us can show up and just be, you know, a DP or a camera op or what have you. If you're working on a full, you know, doc or, you know, narrative film production, then those roles are filled. But if you're working on a corporate project or a wedding or whatever it is, and you're typically the only guy, or there's like a few people, maybe like 2 or 3 people on set. And if that's the case, then it's your job to kind of fill all those roles that would typically be on a film set. And obviously you can only do them to an extent. You're only one person or a few people, but you should put your best foot forward. And one of those roles that often gets thrown out is art directing, right? And so you need to kind of fill those shoes. You need to be able to walk into a space and rearrange things and choose what is going to be in frame. You shouldn't just walk into a room, set the camera up, pick your angle, and then start shooting. You should actually craft what is in front of the lens. It's not just about your camera and your lens choice and all of that, and your lighting. Those are really, really good, and that helps bring the best out of a space, but you can go a step further than that. You can actually change the space. And so when you walk in, you should be looking at how can we reposition things to make a better composition? How can we rearrange things so that we have, you know, the best pieces of the room in frame, things that, you know, work well with the story that we're trying to tell. So that's pretty much it. Those are the 5 different kind of like special overlooked skill sets that I wanted to cover today. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you in the next one.